So we are, well, online back in the dark again because, well, the lighting apparently fits the mood for the topic. And today we're dealing with assisted suicide, or otherwise known as euthanasia, or if we're following the Canadian legislation, medical assistance in dying. So they're all basically the same thing. Also, what I was talking about last week is that it can just be dubbed mercy killing. But if you dub this mercy killing, well, that tends to have negative press attached to it. So people very much like to avoid anything like that. And that's why people use the word euthanasia, which literally means good death. And then there's so much negative press with euthanasia. And just thinking my own memory to this, that kind of fell out with the whole controversy with Jack Kevorkian in the United States, also known as Dr. Death. Not to be confused with Dr. Doom in the comics, but or Dr. Destiny in the DC comic. Anyways, because Kevorkian, what he was doing was he was discreetly killing patients, and basically he was tried for, I can't remember how many counts of murder. But since euthanasia got tied with that idea that this is actually murder, people have moved on from that to assisted suicide, and then suicide is not as friendly, so medical assistance in dying. So now it's suicide is not the main focus, but now with medical assistance in dying, the assistance is what's drawing the focus. So it's not dying or kill it, or
so it's
assistance.
Yeah, in mercy killing, the objective, the word killing.
Yeah.
Mercy, not mercy.
Well, with anything related to mercy killing, it is just you're putting somebody out of their misery.
While medical assisted, in death is putting somebody out of their misery. Right.
Yeah, but it's relabeling it.
Yeah, it's relabeling the same thing, but it's still mercy.
Well, we would argue that it's not mercy, but it is definitely killing. Yeah.
The person concerned would have to want it.
Yes.
You can't just go and start euthanasia on somebody.
Yeah, and that's why it was known, well, popularly known as assisted suicide for quite some time, because it is suicide. You get the choice. But now with medical assistance in dying, basically they're taking the suicide, like you killing yourself, out of the equation, and now it's them just assisting you through professional means, the medical, in your dying. So it's not even saying that you're killing yourself, which it actually is, because you're taking the step to do so. It's just you receiving professional assistance as you go down to death. So it's not even, it's all, well, I would can't say it's a semantic shell game, but
It is.
yeah.
But again, it requires the person to give his consent, or actually say that he wants
Yeah.
And how can a sick person give consent?
Because as I was talking about last week, a lot of it is tied to personal autonomy. And assisted suicide, as I was talking about last week, is not necessarily about putting someone out of their misery per se, because we would associate that with just being in some sort of pain. But this is broadened out, misery is broadened out just to include living a lifestyle that you are not accustomed to. So now you not having control over aspects or the entirety of your life. So you're not in control of when you die. So assisted suicide is putting you back into control, per se, of you get to choose when you die before you're naturally going through.
But wasn't that just changed a few months ago, that now the person who wants to die does not even have to be on the way to death, according to the doctors.
We're going to be getting into that.
And that's just the point I'm a little upset about. I mean, it takes the reason away.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway.
Well, yeah, we're going to get into that. I just want to mention real quick before we actually get into the MAID legislation in Canada, and we're going to have a basic overview of it. I'm not going to go through point by point what's there. But before that basic overview, as a reminder of what we were looking at last week, we were looking at two cases of assisted suicide in Scripture. One was Abimelech in Judges chapter 9. So he was the guy who basically murdered his family, and he had a huge extended family, so he was killed dozens of people. And when there were basically reprisals as he was in assaulting the city to try and take it, a woman threw a stone on him. He knew that he was dying, and then he asked one of his soldiers to finish him off so that it could be said a woman did not kill him. So we would count that a little chauvinistic today, but the idea was since women were not professional soldiers, that was not necessarily the best death you could die.
He died like a Klingon.
So Abimelech chose to die earlier so that he could actually have a reputable death. Although since the comment in the scriptures at the close of Judges chapter 9 is basically saying that he died in a way fitting his wickedness. So not only the manner of being defeated by a woman, which was the case of honor at that time, but also dying of assisted suicide, that was also considered disgraceful and sinful. The other major case that we're looking at was King Saul, and we looked at 2 Samuel chapter 1. The events of the death also include the last chapter of 1 Samuel. We were focusing specifically on 2 Samuel 1 because we have a first-hand account being given about from the guy who actually killed Saul, assisted him in his suicide. So what Saul tried to do was fall in his own spear. So he tried to kill himself. He didn't quite make it. So it is very slowly bleeding out, and he wanted somebody just to finish him off, especially before the Philistines came and overtook him. And there was an Amalekite, so not an Israelite, but an Amalekite wandering by, heard this king, and then finished him off, took the royal symbols from him to bring to David. And the idea was, hey, David, look at these symbols. I killed King Saul as he told me to do. So I was faithful. And then David says, you killed somebody God anointed. How dare you do this? You condemned yourself by your own testimony. And the guy was executed.
Wow.
So it is seen as something reprehensible to kill yourself or have somebody else take part in that killing. And that's a scriptural position. Again, this is all an extension of the 5th commandment. So you shall not murder, which also includes manslaughter. So you're not supposed to kill yourself, and you're also not supposed to kill anybody else. But when we're looking at the question of assisted suicide today, usually it's framed more within the context of when is it right for you just to exit out of life? And the question becomes a question of pain, more so than honor. But as I was saying before, when we find a lot of people requesting MAID, medical assistance in dying, it's actually more of a question of honor for them, that this is a way for them to take control back for themselves. They get to choose when they die. In fact, when I was talking about Jack Kevorkian, that was his main motivation, was basically to assist his patients with suicide in order to maintain, as he was saying, personal freedom.
Puts the doctors on the spot.
Yes, I attended a talk years and years ago, and the professional who came out to talk to us, so he was a Christian. He was saying that this kind of puts him against his own conscience, because at that time, and I haven't really seen it change, not that I know of, unless there's something I missed. At that time, if somebody requested you to administer assisted suicide, you were now legally bound as a physician to administer it, whether or not you agreed with it.
Well, surely you can refuse to do that.
Not at that time.
Oh, okay, but
You could actually have a lawsuit brought against you by the government of Canada for refusing to do that assisted suicide.
malpractice. No, that's,
So again, I haven't really researched that in particular, but it was required at that time. So I don't know if this has changed. I really hope it has. But this is an overview for Canadian medical assistance in dying. So I'm looking at my notes here. Also, people online, that's why I'm staring into the screen. So MAID legislation is an amendment to the Criminal Code of Canada for allowance of assistance in dying under particular circumstances. So what this means is there's not a particular bill saying this is now assisted suicide, this is what we're doing. What it is an adjustment to the criminal code. So this is not its own independent entity, but making allowances within the criminal code, thus basically changing how people can be tried in this nation. So deviation from how it's phrased in the Criminal Code of Canada means that you can be prosecuted for violating the criminal code. But this also means that you are legally allowed to do what the criminal code outlines. So if you follow this to the letter, you can kill hundreds, thousands. There's no real limit to this. I mean, except the population of the country. So requests for MAID, they can be made, they must be made by somebody who's over the age of 18, so the age of majority. So you're legally allowed to make decisions for yourself. You have to be eligible for health services in Canada. So you can't have visitors coming into Canada and say, hey, kill me. And you would say the same thing for basically any medical procedure. Like these are medical services for somebody who's a citizen of the nation. And really throughout whatever all the amendments, all the adjustments to the criminal code, this is how they're treating medical assistance in dying, that this is a treatment. This is not assisted suicide, this is a medical treatment.
surely there must be restrictions other than just the age limit.
Oh, yeah, I'm not done yet.
Okay.
So eligible for health services in Canada, at least 18 years, have a grievous and irremediable medical condition.
That's the one that I'm afraid was changed, basically.
Not quite.
Okay.
So you have to actually be suffering from some sort of medical condition. So this is not saying anyone can now decide I want to kill myself. You actually have to have some sort of medical condition that allows you to say or justify why you would like to kill yourself. So now we're not necessarily sanctioning anybody to kill themselves at any time. Let's say kids who are depressed in high school, no, they can't kill themselves with medical assistance. They're not legally able to do so because they're not suffering from a grievous, irremediable medical condition. However, I need to make a big asterisk to this. Mentally competent, because there is a clause in here, mentally competent and capable of making healthcare decisions for yourself. That's one of the requirements. Mentally competent and capable of making health decisions for yourself. March 17, 2023, there will be alterations to MAID legislation to make MAID available for people with mental health illnesses, permitting people whose only medical condition is their mental illness to be eligible for MAID. So if we're talking about, again, depressed kids in high school, depression is a mental condition. It can even be classified as irremediable, even though you can actually get better, it can be medicated, it can be helped. So theoretically, kids in high school, if they are 18, they can apply for this as of March 17, 2020, theoretically. And I don't know how they've really put it together elsewhere, but I'll get into it later with this. But for non-life-threatening conditions, just an irremediable health condition, there is a 90-day evaluation period. Now, I'm not entirely sure, because the 90 days sounds like when you're first aware of the specific condition, but the age of 18, that I don't know if that requires you to be 90 days plus 18 years, or if it's 90 days made aware, and then as soon as you turn 18, you can apply get MAID. I don't know.
Well, surely that requires a professional to state whether you are having a mental problem or not.
Yes.
Not your own say so.
Yeah.
But I seem to remember when this legislation came out that there was a phrase that one or two doctors had to state that the person wanting to get killed had not just an irredeemable problem, but it would be, he would likely to die within X months or whatever it was. I forgot the exact wording. So that seems to have been removed now.
But the imminency of death is not one of the requirements.
No.
No. The imminency of death is not a requirement.
Okay.
So you could live forever for 10 years. Doesn't matter.
Or-
It's not imminent death.
Or
It's
you
a
can live
requirement.
an entirely natural lifespan.
Right.
Yeah.
But the imminency of death is not.
I'm just thinking about the opposite. I'm quite involved in the hospice here. You can't become a hospice patient unless somebody says you're going to die sooner or later anyway. You know, so where the emphasis is on you have to be sick enough before you can get a space to.
Yeah, and it's imminent death.
Yeah.
It's coming because
But
I know somebody that was in
it's,
hospice.
Something like 2 weeks or something, they have a limit on it.
Well, but I know somebody, yeah, and imminent death is supposed to be there. And if you're not imminently going to die, then you don't get to stay in hospice. They may take you for a couple of days or they'll send you home. They say no, that's not.
Just wondering whether the change in legislation is now such that there's a little bit of moving and shoving, just about anybody can do it, you know.
Yeah.
If there is no restriction on your likely deterioration of health, be it mental or physical, what is stopping somebody from asking for assisted suicide? Well, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing, yeah.
It's the same thing. One of the doctors will be pushing against it, I would imagine. Not everybody would want to do that.
Not necessarily, because there will be some, let's say, Christian doctors who are agreeing with us along with scripture saying that this is the wrong thing to do. But as long as the word game continues,
Yeah.
saying that this is another treatment or solution, even the final solution, then people will naturally view this as a good thing.
And statistically, it's horrendous the number of people who've been requesting this.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I imagine come 2023, when we have people with their sole condition is mental illness, I imagine you're going to get tons and tons of people suffering from chronic depression saying, kill me.
but if you, yeah.
Do you think it might be possible for a Christian to not realize the danger of losing their salvation if they are talked into, they have a terminal illness and maybe they're suffering a lot of pain?
Not necessarily suffering pain, because again, this is
Okay.
really about personal autonomy.
Yes.
I'm not going to say it's not a factor, but it is quite a bit of personal autonomy. Absolutely, Christians will be requesting this.
And would you consider there's a difference between a mental illness and a physical illness? Because mentally ill people are mentally ill, so they can, I wouldn't think them of sound mind and body to make that decision. While
Doesn't
I
matter.
may be physically ill and a lot of pain, but my mental capacity is not sick. Are you going to say it's influenced by pain?
Doesn't matter, because this doesn't account for what I believe you're describing, which is duress. Duress is the stress forcing you or guiding you towards making a decision.
I'm saying that a mental illness will not allow you to think clearly, as opposed to a physical illness.
That doesn't matter, because you're still under duress either way. Because of physical illness, you can be suffering from extreme pain, which will curb your thoughts. Mental illness will just curb your thoughts in a different way.
In any case, a health professional will have to verify that you are suffering from whatever.
So I still have 2 more requirements on the list. So we have eligible for health services, 18 years old, grievous irremediable medical condition, mentally competent and capable of making healthcare decisions. Now, 5th is make a voluntary request for MAID, not resulting from pressure or influence. So this is it being recommended to you by a healthcare professional or by a third party, then you saying, yes, I want this. Now that doesn't, but does the my personal caveat is like, well, doesn't the recommendation from the healthcare professional now naturally constitute pressure or influence? Yeah.
Not exactly.
So yeah, if the healthcare professional is saying you're being a burden to your family, you should probably just end it all. Yeah. And then the 6th and final requirement is give informed consent for MAID. So if you're making a request for it, a voluntary request, you now have to have informed consent about what this means. So the medical professionals are required to inform the patient about alternative medical options and palliative care. So they say, this is an option, MAID is an option, but you also have these other options. Now, this is also subject to certain pressures and influences, of course. Not to say that all medical professionals are evil, but I'm saying that this, like anything else, can be abused. So if somebody says you have this range of medical options, well, this will mean that you're staying in pain for a long, long time. Whereas if you select MAID now, you're only in pain for a short time, and they can try and frame it something like that. So it's this will come down to the individuals. the person who, the patient and the medical professional as to what they're going to do and how they're trying to approach the subject. Because if, again, if you're viewing MAID as a medical treatment rather than just killing somebody, mercy killing, you are now saying that this is a valid way to treat somebody, and this will minimize pain. In fact, you'll never feel anything again. So if you want to absolutely minimize pain, why don't you just select this almost every single time? And again, this will come down to the individuals involved, but it can be used.
So where does competency comes in? So if you have mental health issues, you may not be competent.
This will come down again to individuals where your psychiatrist, psychologist, these are now the medical professionals who are treating you.
Yeah.
Rather than say your general practitioner or anybody like that, this is now a medical professional of a different kind. However, if I remember correctly, a psychiatrist can't do this, because if we're talking about specific treatments, psychologists can write prescriptions, a psychiatrist cannot. So
It's reverse.
is it the reverse? I
Psychiatrist
thought
is
it
a
was.
medical doctor. The other way around.
Other way around.
Okay. Well, then I was wrong. I knew one was one and one was the other. Anyways, so psychiatrists can then would be able to, the psychologist cannot.
Yeah.
Although this is all up for grabs depending on any future legislation.
Yeah, that's true.
So if, again, this has to be classified as a medical treatment. So in that case, it would be the psychiatrist as the medical practitioner, and they would give their informed consent. This person is making their own rational decisions based on what I know about them and their health, mental health condition. So it wouldn't be somebody who is locked away in an insane asylum per se, because they may not be able to have awareness of reality to a certain degree, in which case their decisions are somewhat suspect. But if you have somebody who's outside of an asylum and are basically living their lives normally, except with a mental health condition, they can now elect for this. And really comes down to, because I'm hearing some people go like, well, if you have a mental health condition, you're mentally impaired. Well, that's kind of the prejudice of the culture's prejudice against people with mental health conditions. The truth of the matter is that these people are extremely rational. They're capable of making
state of medication.
Well, even without medication, they can still be incredibly rational. I'll use the example of somebody with depression. The depression will make them have certain emotional capacities, and they will be in a depressed capacity, but that doesn't mean that they're not making rational decisions. The rational decisions will just be influenced by their emotional state.
Okay, that's not a good example. What about a person elderly that developed dementia and has no one else?
Yeah, the dementia's allowed now.
It is?
Yes.
Yeah,
because-
okay.
Because the first guy who got, I happen to know the person, but
Yeah.
he moved here to Victoria. And he was the first Alzheimer's patient to be afforded this treatment. And because his quality of life was so low, and he's a librarian, he loved to read and stuff, he couldn't do that anymore. So they just decided, he and his family decided this would be a good option for him, so.
So nobody, his family decided. Not him.
Well, no, he decided well in advance,
Oh, in
so
advance,
while
yeah.
he was
Yeah.
still coherent.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And then they
Yeah.
said, when he gets to this point,
Right.
a couple of years down the road, then they would,
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes more sense.
Don't have.
but yeah,
That
so,
makes-
yeah. so
Yeah, I'll get to that. So,
that's a slippery slope too, though.
so now we're going to get into the part where having a grievous and irremediable medical condition, what does this actually mean? So as it says in what I was looking at, reading on the Government of Canada's page on this, and I will include this as a link in the posted video when I put this on YouTube. So look down in the description below if you're watching this as a recording. So it is included, it is described as a serious illness, disease, or disability. Again, not very descriptive. And then I have on in my notes, mental illness to be added to this list 2023. So it's also said to be in an advanced state of decline that cannot be reversed. And at which point, what does that really mean? So talking for myself, let's say, so I have diabetes type 1, I've had it for years and years and years. It can't be reversed. I'm not necessarily in an advanced state of decline because I'm taking my medication, my insulin, but would I still qualify for MAID under that qualification, being in an advanced state of decline that cannot be reversed? Because I'm not getting any better from this. There's currently no cure for it. So does that mean that I'm now eligible? If I now decide after years of medical treatment with insulin that insulin is now reprehensible to me and it's not coinciding with my idea of dignity in my life. Now that's a relatively flippant example, I would say. But if we're talking, say, about something more serious, like somebody with, say, kidney failure, and they're having to take dialysis, maybe their state isn't declining, but they now have to take dialysis for the rest of their life. Like it's not going to get necessarily a lot worse if they're following the regular regimen, but they're still in an advanced state of that disease and it cannot be reversed. So would that actually qualify for me? And I actually have had a pastor who was dealing with a parishioner, like I was in conversation with a pastor who said that he had a parishioner who now had to go into dialysis, and he said, well, this is unacceptable to me, so I'm going to request me. Except this was in the States at the time, so I don't know what they called it there right at that time. And then the pastor has to talk with this person and say, like, no, that's not biblical, it's not scriptural. Yeah.
Well, the big difference whether you're suffering from something incurable and the time comes that you want to end that, you can, under the law now, ask for assisted death, but you can also have in your will or say to the doctor you simply want to stop treatment, which will eventually kill you, but it is not not administered from the outside. So that is not against Christianity if you simply stop treatment. But if you're asking somebody to kill me, that is.
To play devil's advocate. If I, again, I'm talking about myself specifically. So me with type 1 diabetes. So I'm not in a terrible state of decline yet. But again, if I decide, hey, I'm going to stop taking my medical treatment, it's going to take a few years, but I will eventually be in an advanced state of decline of which there is no reversal. At which point now, if we're saying MAID, well, then I've just decided to sign my own death warrant by refusing medical treatment for a treatable disease.
But only when you're near the end anyway.
but I made the conscious decision, I'm going to kill myself, therefore I'm going to kill myself very slowly by not taking medical treatment.
You're still reducing the process.
Yeah, and with somebody who needs dialysis, all they have to do is say, well, I'm going to refuse medical treatment and I'm going to kill myself very slowly that way.
But that contravene the fifth commandment.
Exactly. Because at this point, we're now talking about intent. Because if we're talking about just killing somebody, well, we're thinking about a particular action, but what is the intent behind all these actions? So for the Christian, their intent should be not to take their own life. So not commit murder, not murder yourself. And that would include also not refusing medical treatment with the intent of killing yourself.
So people who have like a tattoo or something that do not resuscitate, or bracelets that do not resuscitate, is that considered? Because again, they're not expecting to die, but in case they get to a point where they have to, parents have to come, you know, is that the same thing?
That's kind of a borderline thing for me, where at a certain point, if we're talking about somebody who's in a very particular state where they have to survive through extraordinary means, and this is going to come, this is the question: is resuscitation now extraordinary means by which you are surviving? And we would say, well, of course, every single resuscitation is extraordinary means, because the basic means, the natural means, would be food, drink, clothing, keeping warm, like that's all very sensible. But with any medical intervention, you can classify that as extraordinary means. For resuscitation, if somebody is going to be in a state where, let's say, you resuscitate them from the immediate threat of death, and then they're going to be now dying slowly over an extra 90 days. Maybe they had an extremely severe stroke, and then you resuscitated them, and then now they have to live very slowly and start fading away. That's kind of the borderline issue, where it's, well, you don't necessarily want them to be in that state, but you also can't necessarily tell if that's going to be the end result, that they're just going to die anyways, fairly shortly after. But with resuscitation in the general sense, it's always going to be intended that you're going to try and make this person survive and have them live to the best of their ability for the rest of their natural life. So do not resuscitate, I think it's a little, it's a bit of an overstep.
Because I think sometimes the act of resuscitation, like you said, can
Yeah.
actually bring on a quickening of eventual death.
Oh, yeah, okay.
You know, like
Or prolonged.
Because I know resuscitation, depending, of course, but
Yeah,
resuscitation
yeah.
can be quite physically strenuous.
Oh, yes.
And so it's a, you know, like it would be so strenuous that it may end up hurting them and shortening your life somehow. Yeah, that's a tricky.
It's very tricky. And there's also medications, if you're taking them, these can actually hasten death. However, at that point, you're also wondering, well, if you're considering giving them medications that can actually hasten death, what do these medications do? Like, is it given to them for the intent of relieving their pain,
Right.
or is this given to them for the intent of hastening their death?
Yeah, that's right.
And if we're talking about people who are in a state of dying, they're going to take some time in dying, well, it would probably make more sense to give them that medication, which would hasten death, but would actually relieve the pain as they go out. It's not an easy thing to think through, of course, but you can reason, well, this might be the most caring option that we have. But in any scenario, you do want to give informed consent, whereas I can give you this medication to ease pain, or you can live theoretically another week. Which one do you want? And I believe more often than not, people probably say, I want relief of pain.
The old school doctors are under more obligation to maintain you alive as long as they can. But there comes a point when the patient, after 6 weeks or whatever, doesn't want anymore. And that's where the problem comes in. When is it murder? When you ask not to receive any more medicine.
Okay,
Uh,
hold that thought. We'll deal with MAID first, and then we'll get back to that. Because I actually have notes for that after the MAID thing. Okay, but that's important. That's also something very important that we need to discuss. Because there's also a biblical example of this.
Oh, wow. That's a-
More or less.
okay.
Okay. So the grievous medical conditions that we're talking about: serious illness, disease, disability, in bad state of decline, cannot be reversed. The and then so if we're going by that, we're also saying that yes, this does not have to be a fatal or terminal condition. So the advanced state of decline, that's all you need. So the next qualification that has to be here for the medical condition is experience unbearable physical or mental suffering from the illness, disability, or state of decline that cannot be relieved under conditions the patient considers acceptable. Notice the wording. Experience unbearable physical or mental suffering from the illness, disability, or state of decline that cannot be relieved under conditions the patient considers acceptable.
Okay, that leaves a little door.
That leaves a huge door. So the wording is very, very troubling, since anyone who considers their condition to conflict with the way of life they prefer can opt for MAID. Again, the fellow I was telling you about that I was talking to the pastor in the States, who said, well, I have to go in for dialysis. And he says, well, I don't consider this acceptable for my life. Therefore, he can now opt for assistance in dying according to, well, Canada's legislation.
The definition of unbearable pain, is it the patient or the doctor who says so?
Yeah.
How do you measure pain?
With pain units, of course.
Right.
I've experienced 5 tribulations. Yeah, you can't do this because this is a qualitative thing. And with any qualitative thing, this is why it's so huge of a door that's left open by the wording. And the same issue faces us with, say, questions for abortion. And again, I know this is a very, very different topic, but for the United States legislation, it's the woman who is pregnant, she can say, if this is unbearable to me, if I'm experiencing some sort of suffering to me, if I'm experiencing something I do not consider acceptable, I can now elect for an abortion. So this is put up to the subjective experience of the mother, whether or not this might disagree with other pregnant women's experiences. Because if you have, say, a pregnant woman who goes, well, I will withstand this much pain and no more. And then you can also have a woman who would say, well, I will withstand this much pain and no more. Then as soon as you watch, say, a childbirth video, you go, nope. And you just, I don't do that.
Nope.
I'm sorry, I know that it's a little too comical for the grave gravity of the situation. But if somebody says, well, I will withstand a bare minimum, that does leave it very wide open to say, well, if I consider this such and such pain to me accessible, well, what are you going to do? And if it's like the feeling of tearing apart flesh, if you consider that unbearable, or would you consider a toothache unbearable or headache unbearable? And if you say, well, if I have to live with a very mild headache for the rest of my life, I'd rather off myself right now. That can technically be considered grounds for MAID. I'm pretty sure doctors nowadays wouldn't really accept that type of complaint or condition for MAID, but who knows what the future will bring.
Well, there was a clause, I believe, that it takes at least 2 doctors, they have to agree on that. You can't just pick your doctor, yeah, tell me, and it wasn't anyway, so.
I haven't actually seen like medical consensus. I didn't notice that in what I was looking at online, but although I wasn't looking hard for that specifically, so it might still be in there. But with the recent bill that came out, one of the things that really struck me is the removal, and again, this is just very recently. So there was the removal of the 10-day reflection period.
Really?
Yeah, so that's removed. So the reflection period was implemented to give patients time to reflect on their decision for MAID before receiving it. Removing it means MAID can, well, theoretically be made immediate.
But there's 90 days.
No,
What's the
but that's 90 days if this is not a fatal condition, fatal terminal condition. That's what the assessment period is for. The 10-day reflection period was for everybody. But now 10-day reflection period removed for people with immediate, or sorry, not immediate, removed for people with just a fatal condition. They can now theoretically make MAID immediate. Theoretically, like it's not going to be immediate because they still have to consult a doctor and stuff. It can be, the decision can be made relatively quickly. So when I was actually looking at where this was appearing online, and again, I'll be putting the link in the description of the video on YouTube. So the justice report that I was reading states that the period was repealed because, and this is more or less hearsay, because patients requesting MAID do so after careful consideration, often over an extended period of time. And when I read that, I thought, well, that says nothing of the few people who don't actually reflect over this. It's just making a generalization.
Mm-hmm. A big assumption.
Yeah. And also there, another reason given for the repeal was patients often refuse certain treatments in order to ensure that they can give final consent. So final consent is when you come to the point of MAID. So you request it, you wait 10 days, and then you have to give a final consent because you can't actually change your mind. That's why you have the 10-day reflection period, and you can change your mind up until basically they kill you. So you need to give final consent saying, yes, kill me. However, if the medications that you are on mess with your head a bit, and you can't give, and you're not in the correct state of mind, because again, one of the qualifications for MAID is that you have to be mentally competent and capable of making healthcare decisions. So if you're not mentally capable of finding that final consent form saying, yes, I still want MAID, then that can be repealed. So people are saying, no, I don't want these medications, so I'll go through extra amounts of pain so that I can sign the final consent. So since, and this as a reason makes absolutely no sense to me, because what was also repealed at the exact same time as the 10-day reflection period was the need to give final consent with patient capability. Because as it now stands, a patient, they should be giving final consent, but the change to the bill is, or change with the bill, I mean, because the bill is to the criminal code. The change with the bill is if somebody is without capacity, they can still receive MAID. The only way that they will not receive MAID if they do not have capacity is if they're refusing the treatment MAID treatment as it's being delivered. So if you're without capacity, so you can't communicate exactly what you want, and they're trying to administer this, but they can't, that's when they will, because you're not living, that's when they would stop. So now that completely removes this as like the patient's refusing certain treatment. That completely removes this as an objection to the repeal of the 10-day waiting period. Yeah. So, so the 10-day reflection period removed, and they implemented the 90-day assessment period. So the 90-day assessment period is only for patients whose natural death is not foreseeable. So they're not in a fatal condition. So the period is to determine alternative treatments to reduce patient suffering. That's what the 90 days is for, is to say, well, this is the breadth of the treatments available. Let's research this. Let's make sure that you know about all this.
But for mental
Yeah.
health stuff, they have to try sometimes a wider variety of medications. 90 days is, and some of these medications, from what I understand, can take 12 weeks to work to even start to show proper effect.
Yep.
So if you're trying, I don't even know how many medications there are out there, but if you're trying, plus other therapies, 90 days would not be enough to. So I assume somebody, if they had depression and wanted to have assisted dying, they'd have a long history of trying a whole bunch of things before they'd be, I hope, would be considered eligible. Yeah.
Yeah. This will basically come down to the individuals involved again.
Yeah.
If the patient is willing to try alternative treatments, and if their medical advisor is willing to suggest them and follow through with this, or if they're very much willing to recommend them to MAID before everything is exhausted.
It sounds to me like the door is wide open.
Yeah.
Yep. And yeah, I'm still unsure exactly how the 90 days works, and I tried reading through this, and I don't know. Yeah, it's not very specific, at least not on the places where I was looking, and the only places I could actually find this. Because if somebody had, let's say, this person has their condition diagnosed well over 90 days before their decision. So let's say you've been suffering from a condition for the past couple of years, and now suddenly you say, well, I prefer MAID now. Does that mean that the 90 days have already been served, or is the 90 days actually beginning when you say, I want to do this?
Yeah. It should be at the beginning, ideally.
Yeah.
It should be 90 years. It should have 90 years.
I think it's 90 days from the moment you raise the question.
Well, then but I'm pretty sure the average life expectancy in Canada is less than 90, so
I
I
know,
don't think.
so Miss French should say 90.
But the question still remains, is all of that running against the commandment, thou shalt not kill,
Yep,
That's right.
basically.
in every aspect?
Not in every aspect, in the sense that,
There must be some.
because if it was in every aspect, then people would be writing this legislation to try and fast track people to death. That would be in every aspect. What's really going on is people are actually trying to care for their patients, but do so in the wrong way. So they're thinking, because if they're trying to frame this as a treatment, the people who are framing it as a treatment want to make this sound friendly because they think that this is an actual treatment. However, if we're actually calling it what it is, we would soon realize it's not a treatment, but people would like to think that it is.
But they're fast tracking them to death.
Well, no, they're not fast tracking them to death, because if they were, then they'd have like no reflection period whatsoever. And then as soon as you say, I want to kill myself, doctor goes, okay, and then pulls out a gun.
Well, no, but I mean, still, they're making it the option very appealing. To
Yes.
the individual. Yeah, I think they're fast tracking them to death, and they're making it very appealable. very supported by the family, things like that. They're not saying that it's not against scripture or things like that. You know,
Well, yeah, well,
But I
they say
mean,
like
they're
scripture
really-
has no place in
no,
governments.
but I mean, they're certainly making it an attractive
Oh,
opportunity.
absolutely,
And I think
absolutely.
they're fast tracking it. I mean, look at the numbers of the statistics, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, this is usually why Christians will say that this is a slippery slope. And then, of course, people will say, well, you can't use the slippery slope argument because by definition, a slippery slope argument is a logical fallacy. However, whenever you look at what people are arguing a slippery slope for, there's always the slippery slope. So even though technically it's a logical fallacy, it basically always happens this way. So if we look at like past iterations of legislation, it's always being made more readily available, always, always, always. Even in the countries like well before Canada, who made this available, they're very much making it a fast track issue. One of the pastors on the island sent around a news article that he recently discovered, where they made a new death pod.
Oh, yeah.
Where you can actually activate it yourself just by blinking. Because if you're suffering from a medical condition where you can't necessarily move, now they will just shove you into this pod and you can blink and it will activate and kill you.
And you can take the pod anywhere you want. So if you want to go to the beach and activate it, it's in Switzerland actually, from what I heard. That's where it was made, and it apparently didn't. It hasn't taken on much popularity over there. But I saw like it looks like this little space pod thing, and there is a escape hatch in case you change your mind. But you can then put it wherever you want to die, and then it's self-sealing, so you never have to deal with, as they say, the yucky remains. Really?
Yeah, basically
sick.
it's just basically a coffin. And you can,
It's
oh,
a
this is
coffin,
better.
yeah, it's a coffin essentially, with a window, like it's, see if you want to, if you tell your family, bring me down to, the beach or.
Yeah. Or people might eventually do what they did in the movie Soylent Green, where you just
Right.
on that table in the room and then they're like, I want to listen to this sound as I watch this on the screen, and then that's how you die.
Yeah, but it hasn't been gotten popular there so far, so
No.
unfortunately, but it was sickening when I saw that article. I just thought, this is insane.
Oh yeah,
It's insane.
so
It's progress.
yeah, so Canada isn't quite there yet,
No.
but we're at the slippery slope, so we will eventually get there as things progress. That's how it always goes. The only thing that really stops stuff like this in society is if you have a sudden and drastic revolutionary or reactionary move to basically put you in a position where these things are no longer offered. As a drastic example, the French Revolution, people were being guillotined left, right, and center, even by the people who used to guillotine you. And it only took a major revolution, well, technically it was actually a revolution / reaction, with Napoleon taking power, basically making himself the new monarch rather than the republic. And then he reversed things so that even though there was progression from the monarchy, some of the stuff that was going on during the reign of terror in the revolution no longer continued. But the reign of terror itself was a slippery slope where you start out, well, let's just kill all the people who are criminals, then all the nobles, and then all the people who killed the nobles who are now in power, and then it just kept going.
Well, with the stuff going on with abortion debates, and you know how some of the states down south are getting really, like they're encoding anti-abortion laws now and things like that. So it may not be the French Revolution, but there's definitely a lot of division and people, certain states taking stands against euthanasia probably as well. Like those states that would make abortion completely illegal, like criminalize even the mothers for doing it. Those are the same states that probably get rid of euthanasia as well. So
I think so.
who knows
The issue that the states is facing though is, well, one, all states don't have to agree that that's part of the legislation as the United States formed together. So all the states don't necessarily agree, which means if you do want one of these things, abortion or euthanasia, you can theoretically move to the next state over and get it done, or make it a day trip. Two, if we're actually legislating, let's not authorize abortions, let's not do euthanasia. What programs do you have in place now for the babies with insufficient care? And what programs do you have in place for the people with medical conditions where they need extra care?
Right, yeah, if that's both.
Yeah.
Sure.
So if you're stopping people from killing themselves, well, what is making them kill themselves? It's their particular condition. So if you remove the threat of the condition, they're going to be less likely to cause death, one. And if you're forcing them to stop death, then you need to actually find a way to mitigate what's causing the problem, which isn't being done in the States.
I think there are, like, for instance, with abortion, I've heard talk about, mother crisis centers for pregnant women.
Yeah.
And then there's even like centers for women to make decisions about what's going to happen if they do go to term with the babies and things like that.
Yeah.
And those are the centers that are being, if the people are spray painting and thinking, pro-abortion people are spray painting, but I'm not sure there's enough of those centers.
There's not
Probably
even
not,
close
no.
to enough.
But adoption is very popular, so I assume that there's a lot of people who want to adopt babies,
There are, absolutely,
Yeah.
there are. It's just that
Yeah,
let's say in a good scenario,
yeah,
not the best scenario, but a good scenario, United States completely bans abortion. Now, the 2 million babies that are normally aborted every single year, they are now being born. The 2 million people that now have to be entering into these centers.
yeah.
Can the centers and adoption agencies possibly process now 2 million more people?
Right. In the whole of the country, I'm not sure.
Yeah, because that's the basic issue.
Mhm.
Is if you're going to stop this, what does it mean for you to stop it?
Right, like I've heard about a link between lower crime rates and abortion. Because women are now able to have abortion, there's been lower crime rates in certain parts of the cities, in big cities in the United States, but I don't think that's I don't know, it still seems like a terrible reason to abort babies.
I don't know, well,
So let's lower our crime rates,
because that's just going into utilitarian ethics,
Yeah.
where it's, well, how do we have the best possible outcome given the propositions as we face them? Well, we could lower crime at the cost of X many lives.
Right. Right. That's a slippery slope too, because then you start taking out other
Well,
kinds of
that's how people
right?
approach ethics usually. It's a
Yeah.
utilitarian ethic.
Yeah,
And it doesn't work.
no.
Because if you're actually dealing with utilitarian ethics, now you actually have to create pain and pleasure units in order to try and weigh them out,
Right.
which doesn't work. Thank you,
Okay.
Bentham.
Pastor, have you noticed that a lot of the people that are like for abortion are against capital punishment,
Yep.
for criminals that
Oh, yeah.
murder?
Yeah, the part of this, not the entire thing, part of this is a problem created by the United States. Like a lot of problems are, but I'm joking.
Mhm.
But in the United States, basically, you have a two-party system for politics. So if you have one party supporting one proposition, then the other party has to take the exact opposite. Yeah. So if one party started out with, let's say, you can't have abortions, but capital punishment is okay, then the other side automatically says capital punishment must be stopped and abortion must continue. However, I believe there's far more consistency in saying we can have capital punishment and no abortion, because capital punishment is in response to violent crimes. Hopefully, we're not doing this over trivial matters. Whereas if you're pro, let's kill unborn babies, but not kill people with extremely violent tendencies that are detrimental to society, it doesn't make any sense. So I think one is more consistent, not necessarily completely consistent, but is more consistent than the other. So it's not necessarily that part and parcel everybody who's pro-abortion is anti-capital punishment.
No, I didn't mean that, but I
No,
know there are quite a few.
I know you don't, but
Quite a
there's
few
not
are.
a link, but that link I think is coming more out of the United States than other places which are dealing with these issues.
Yeah.
Again, slippery slope, people are kind of heading that way anyways, where it's, let's just ban certain punishments for crimes, but allow certain deaths for other things.
Well, give an example of Canada. We don't really have any abortion laws at all, but we don't have capital punishment, do we?
We have quite a few abortion laws.
Not anymore.
No, the abortion laws are pro-abortion.
Right, that's what, yeah, right. But then we don't have capital punishment at all.
Yeah, so this is where we're going down to what has caused us to reach this point. For the United States, this was kind of more of a political endeavor for us, as well as for European countries, which are kind of more or less in the same position as Canada is, because Europe and Canada are more progressive than the States. But what kind of forced us to this is we're looking at personal autonomy more than anything else. And this is what we're valuing, and this is how we're making decisions, is you have to have this freedom to do this. So unborn babies, what freedoms do they have? Oh, well, they don't have formed brains, therefore they don't get a vote. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
violent criminals, they have autonomy to a degree. Maybe they're suffering from their own mental health conditions, and that's why they committed some of these crimes. But you're now saying, well, let's not execute people willy-nilly, even though we execute people willy-nilly in other capacity. And euthanasia is coming to be a problem because it's not even becoming a matter of autonomy anymore, because now it's a matter of economics.
Or convenience.
Well, I'm going to say more economics, because that's bringing convenience into it. Because for quite a few people, this is considering MAID. They're considering it because now I'm a burden. I don't have the personal autonomy to do X, Y, Z. I can't help my family anymore. Now that I'm not useful, I should probably exit out of life just to benefit others. At that point, now we're looking at people as economic productivity centers rather than human beings.
Right.
So this is all very dehumanizing, but this is more or less what Marxist policies get you. And I kind of use that term loosely because Marx wasn't really trying to promote this. But when you deal with people who are adapting Marxist ideas and saying, well, let's have materialism as our go-to ethic. And this is all production, all progression. As soon as we're not progressing, what does that mean for us, especially as individuals? Well, since we're considering the whole is more important than individual parts, let's get rid of the individual parts. This is why human rights issues are such a big deal in communist China, because you always have more people. If you piss off or kill a few million of them, that's fine, because you always have a couple billion more. Well, you have 1 billion more, but you always have a billion more. So when we're looking at, say, topical issue right now, the shutdowns in Shanghai, where nonsensical divisions in the city all over the place, people being isolated, brought out of their families, even locked away in certain centers where you don't have food and starving to death, huge riots everywhere, and the police are saying, go back into your place and die in quiet. They're not actually saying that, but that's basically what they're promoting. Well, that's because of the communist mentality, is that you're trying to protect the whole rather than the individual. We're suffering from the opposite problem in North America, especially the United States, which views the individual far more important than the whole. This is why personal autonomy is ranked so highly. But for Canada and most of Europe, which is, yes, very hyper individualistic, but also stressing some, well, Marxist communist archetype. Now we're heading into, well, economic value. So yes, we're kind of going back into looking to the whole, but it's you with your personal autonomy contributing to the whole. It's weird.
Yeah.
Very philosophical, very political, and I'm reading too much Zizek, I guess. I don't know.
It's a very, very sad point for when you're over 90 and you start thinking, am I useful for anything? I can't do anything.
Exactly.
It comes to the point where you really have a tough time justifying your existence.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's odd from, say, a biblical point of view, where we have to say, well, you have to justify your existence.
Yeah.
Do you?
You have to show that you're productive or contributing or whatever, right?
Well, not according to scripture.
Economically,
Yeah.
Yeah, because if we're looking at it from a scriptural point of view, did you decide to bring yourself into being to be productive? Who brought you into being? God? Were you productive for the first several years of your life?
No.
First 20 years of your life? I don't know. Will you be productive the last 10, 20 years of your life? Who knows? The point of the matter is not how much you produce, but who you know. Because God is the one who brought you into being because he delights in you and wants to delight in you. Of course, he wants you to be productive in the sense that you're participating within his creation. But insofar as the creation is, well, degraded through sin, we realize we're not going to be perfect in creation all the time, especially when we feel the effects of sin as we age and start to die. But does that not mean we should look at people with more grace and mercy? Isn't that what you do when you see somebody suffering from sin?
That's the one thing that ties all of these issues that we've been discussing, is the inherent value of human life.
Mhm.
Right? It's not about productivity. You know, God didn't put us on the earth to increase, you know, the GDP or of Canada or wherever.
Well, maybe
we
not
are.
you, but maybe somebody else.
But it's, yeah, it's like there's an inherent value of life, whether it's in the womb or even when you're sick,
Mhm.
or even when you're, and that's the one thing our culture's lost completely, is the
Mhm.
value of human life. That's why it's okay
Yeah.
to kill unborn babies and to kill elderly or sick people, or, you know, encourage, you know, people to take their own lives. If, you know, that's the tragedy. That's the value
Yeah.
we've lost.
Because in the prophetic movie Logan's Run, that's basically what happens, is that you have a very small colony. So this is like dystopian future, world's gone to heck in a handbasket. You have underground society, everybody's living in prosperity. But once you age out, then you're oh so gently led into believing that you're entering into a better paradise. Well, basically that you're being reborn. So you get a new baby in there and you're like, oh yay, live renewed. Yoo. But basically the person who aged out, they're murdered, and then you just have a new baby being brought in. So with Logan's Run, it was viewed very much as quality of life, very much as economic relation. You can't support a huge population, so you can't have elderly. You can't populate the outside world because it's dystopian. It can't support a huge population. So what do? Well, you maintain a small population and regulate it very,
Mathematically.
yeah. So these movies were made for a reason.
Yes, there's true.
Yeah, right.
I could also cite C.S. Lewis, his very, very, very good essay, The Abolition of Man. Very philosophical work too, so it's gonna be hard to get through it, even though it's only like 30 pages long or so. But Lewis was arguing, and this is back in the early 20th century, before we really started having questions about euthanasia and abortion that kind of divided cultures. He was talking about how human beings, as they're moving further and further into sin, what they try to do is they try to grab control. And Lewis was calling them, of course, the controllers. So how do you gain more control over human beings? Well, you control their lives. And when it's more control, you're then deciding when other people die. So you're controlling people at the end of their lives because you're trying to stop them, and you're controlling people at the beginning of their lives by saying, you don't get to have a life, I get to control the whole thing, and end it there in abortion. So Lewis was basically looking at Western civilization and saying this is where it's heading, and yes, of course, we're already there. If you also want interesting introspections into it, I also recommend reading his Space Trilogy. It's fiction, it's easier to read, very interesting. All the villains are versions of the controllers as brought about in The Abolition of Man. I wrote an essay on this in the seminar.
What was the name of that again?
The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis.
The Abolition. Oh, oh, I haven't read that.
Yeah. The first part is outlining about men without chests. That's also very interesting part of the essay.
Space Trilogy, is that what it's called?
Oh, the Space Trilogy are the novels where all the villains are basically the main concern that Lewis has in The Abolition of Man. The Abolition of Man is the essay about 30 pages long. So the first part of that essay is Men Without Chests, where C.S. Lewis is saying, well, we're progressing, and he's English. I feel like I need to say that. Progressing in such a sense where it's wrong to show emotion or care to certain capacities. And very much for British culture, you're crying? What's wrong with you? What do you mean your wife died? Well, just suck it up. Be a man.
Yesterday.
Yeah. So C.S. Lewis is arguing, well, once you start making men without chests, well, the men without chests are now going to act, and they're going to act without as much compassion with other people as you've bred them to be, bred and raised them to be. So when you actually get them in control of other people's lives, or at least capable of controlling other people's lives, the easiest being at the end of life and the beginning of life, then that's just going to progress as it will.
What year did he write that?
I can't remember.
When did he die?
I can't remember. And Professor Gerald Heck will be very disappointed in me. I want to say 54, but that's probably wrong.
I guess we'll have to Google it, right?
I thought it was 52.
It might actually be 52.
Yeah, but
Yes.
Let's look
Okay.
that up. Let's look that up since I'm making a recording. I don't want to be a student. I don't want to look stupid in front of you. Okay.
in the 50s.
Yes.
Yeah, these days everything's couched in feelings. I feel this, I feel that,
Well,
I
it-
feel like I'm a girl in a boy's body. I feel like
Yeah,
I'm this,
yeah.
I feel like, I don't feel like I could do it. And so it's this faux like veneer of, oh, I'm just doing this because I'm killing you because I love you. You know,
Yeah.
I really care, I'm a really good doctor.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was also a very big thing
It's such a
in
lie.
the 1970s with the situationist ethic. So that was very popular in the 1970s, and it was causing a huge stir within Christian communities. And the situationist ethic was, love becomes your ethic. That's how you act. So it's always, as long as you act towards somebody in love, it's right. No matter what you do, it's right. So if you kill one person and save another person, as long as you do either one with love for that particular situation, you are right.
I think that's
Oh,
what
We were both wrong at 63.
Oh, 63.
You were closer though.
1953?
Oh, no, you said 52. I thought, sorry. No, I was closer then.
Will you say that again, please? What year?
C.S. Lewis died in 1963.
63.
He died in 63.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
The feelings thing is very interesting because it's my feelings.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not your feelings, it's my
It's
feelings.
again autonomy, it's like the me.
Yeah, it's breaking yourself off from the group.
Yeah, my feelings, there's no such thing as objective truth, it's all subjective, yeah. And if I feel this way, then it's right.
Yep.
Which is the biggest deception of our current culture.
Yeah, and actually, this is what C.S. Lewis was arguing with Men Without Chips, because what he was trying to present was without care, compassion for other people. So you're actually without a heart. So the people who are now saying, well, it's me, all about me, my feelings, my decisions, my truth.
My truth.
Oh, I know, I
Sorry,
hate
but I
that.
really hate that term now.
I do. I hate it.
Especially
It's
since I know
absolutely
the
terrible.
truth. My-
But when we are talking about that, it's always you focus, and it's never actually compassion or anything. It's just removing all necessity to care for the other,
Absolutely.
which is fundamentally against what God wanted for us. Because well, you can even see it with Adam. The first man, Adam, was created as an individual, but he had certain connector parts that needed a partner.
Yeah.
He was not with the partner in the very beginning, but he still had connector parts to show him, I need a partner. And then he had Eve, and then they could be fruitful and multiply. Because man, as God said at the beginning, like John in Genesis chapter 2, it is like everything was good, everything was good, everything was very good. What was not good was man was alone. That was what was wrong with creation, was for us to be alone. We have to be in community. Now, of course, like we can be in very relations to that community, like people that say social anxiety, they withdraw themselves, and for good reason, but they still depend on a community to help them.
Yeah.
It's just they have to find a different way to relate to that community if they're suffering from, say, social anxiety or other mental or personality conditions that might bring you out of well-developed community. And that's also why extroverts in general are very useful, because they will help break a whole bunch of barriers that sometimes need to be broken. Okay, so Space Trilogy. First one came out 38, next one was 43.
But is that
Next
what
one
it's
was 50.
called, the space trilogy?
Space Trilogy, which one are you talking about? Though?
Well, I'm saying it's a trilogy, so there's 3 books. Are they called the space trilogy?
Yes.
Books 1, 2, and 3. That's what I was trying to figure out.
They're called the Space Trilogy, but it's Out of the Silent, excuse me, Out of the Silent Planet,
Oh,
Paralandra, and That Hideous Strength. Technically, there is an unfinished work that was partially recovered, The Dark Tower, which was supposed to be the 4th book, but never published. Only has scraps of it. Very interesting, though. I wish we had the rest.
And C.S. Lewis, he was not always a Christian, was he?
Oh, no,
He was an atheist at one point, right?
for a long time, yes.
What brought him to accept Christ?
If you want that answer, please read the book written by my former professor, Dr. Joel Heck, From Atheism to Christianity, the C.S. Lewis Story.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not going to go through the whole thing.
Oh, no, I know.
Already at 8:30.
It's a book.
Yeah, it's a book. It's in my office right now.
Okay.
It was mandatory reading. He had to buy his book.
Ah,
It was actually good. It's very interesting to see how everything plays out in its life because it's very integrated through everything. But yeah, so every once in a while you get one of those professors where he's like, "You have to buy my book." Buy it. You can't get the other book that says exactly the same stuff that's over here. You have to get mine. Anyways, so we talked quite a bit about MAID and kind of, well, our reflections on it. So I don't know if you do want to continue for another evening. There's no.
yeah.
It's a fascinating topic, but I don't think there's an end to it.
No. Well, we can still talk about though is addressing people who you might encounter who are considering MAID, similar to what we did for suicide. Just kind of address, well, if somebody's considering suicide, what would you talk about? What would you point to? We could delve into that, and I still have notes here on allowing somebody to die as opposed to taking an active role in assisting their suicide.
Particularly interested in what to do with people, not necessarily elderly, but people who have what they think or somebody tells them is a long-lasting, probably incurable condition.
Mhm.
I have 1, 2, 3 cases in my European family that I would put in that category.
Sure.
They have all died by now, but the question at the time was, is there something that can be done about it? Should there be something? And to what extent is it still in the Christian framework?
Okay. We'll put some thought into that. We can definitely make that. So addressing long-term illness.
We can go on for years with that.
And putting that in my notes so we can actually, I can do some research on that and try to think through it from a biblical perspective. Okay. So we can do that next time, and allowing someone to die.
Yes.
Okay. So let's do this for at least one more night.
Yeah, we're not done talking.
Okay. Let's close with prayer. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us into this world unbidden and according to your good and divine will. We ask you, O Lord, to bless our lives, to give us what we need, and to allow us to live freely within this world. We ask you, O Lord, for help for those who are not as fortunate as us. We ask for those assistance and guidance for those who are considering medical assistance in dying, that you would reveal to them through your word what plans you have for them, reveal to them that they are just not cogs in the machine or economic products or just automatons completely divided from you, O Lord. We ask you that they see themselves within your love and within our community. Please, Lord, guide us in our witnessing to anyone among us who is considering MAID, that give us words to say, and always help us point to our Lord Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen.
Amen.